Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Let Courage Be Your Guide, the podcast, a program where we challenge, reflect, and deconstruct the fears we face in the workplace or throughout our professional career, all while redefining what it means to be courageous. I am your host, Avery Jackman, and thank you for joining me. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Let Courage Be Your Guide. Today is the season finale, and I'm so excited to have an on-air live interview with one of my amazing colleagues, Candice Frederick. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome, Avery. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. It's been a lovely time this season discussing courage and discussing fear. Throughout our careers and throughout our lives and in the workplace. But today is all about the reflection piece and talking a little bit about how, from one person to another, that conversation of courage, because I feel like that would be really helpful for listeners to hear someone else's perspective on this topic. And so I just have 3 questions just to ask you today.
Yeah.
And then we'll start from there. So the first question that I have for you is, what strategies have you implemented in your life that allowed you to become more courageous in the workplace or throughout your professional career?
Yeah, I guess maybe the thing that comes to mind first is just all of the small ways that I've learned to practice speaking up. And sometimes that's saying, I can't. And I think even first admitting that to yourself, because I think sometimes with courage, the focus is on a conversation with another person. But I think part of the way that I've learned to practice courage for myself is to first have that conversation with myself. And even admitting, I think it takes courage to even admit what your limits are.
Yeah.
And then to really respect those limits. And then to communicate them to someone else. So I think there's a few steps before that, but I do think that there is a piece around, okay, I can't, which is not the same as I won't. But sometimes I think mentally it's easy to go there and to think that there's something wrong with you or there's some kind of deficit if you're admitting some kind of limit. So I do think that there is a lot of courage in being able to say, these are my limits. And then the practice of communicating them, I think that, that's how courage shows up. And it can be even just kind of, I think, stopping yourself before you get to that overflow or saturation point. You know what I'm talking about, right? I do think that, that conversation with yourself is one of the ways that you can start to practice courage.
I agree. and you brought up a good point, because I think that piece about reflection is one of the ways I think that I spoke about multiple times, I think, throughout this season. But I think in general about being honest with yourself. I think people think when it comes to journaling, it's just writing what happened today. And I think even sometimes we can filter our own thoughts. I think we can even sometimes filter to protect ourselves, and so that we don't have to be vulnerable, because I think there's nothing more vulnerable than seeing your truth in front of you. It's like, oh, I'm accepting the fact that I can't do something, or I'm accepting the fact that, I've taken on too much, or that I need some change in my life, right?
Yeah.
And I think once you experience that and you're able to accept it and you're able to face it, I think you're ways ahead of, I think, most people who rather just live in denial, unfortunately. But there's so much strength in reflection, and I think that is how I think a great way, I think, to build courage in your life. So thank you for sharing that piece.
Yeah, I really felt that piece that, you said. And I think what also occurred to me is just a piece around, admitting some of those feelings that, we don't want to admit to ourselves. Like, I'm scared. Like, you know, like because it feels that if you admit fear, sometimes it feels like it's going to overtake you. Yeah. But my experience has been the opposite. That if you admit, you know, that you're scared or that there is fear, that in fact, it makes it smaller.
I think you mentioned something before last time we spoke about how fear is not realistic. Fear is not it's not sensible in the sense that like what we feel sometimes when it comes to fear is so much ingrained in our mind and so much within our own heads that we sometimes forget that like in reality, like we're just taking a really huge step, but a step that we really shouldn't be afraid of. I think one thing that I said was like, sometimes in those moments where we feel uncomfortable, it's important to remember that that feeling is also a reminder that perhaps you should be here. And that is a reminder that, you know, you are in the right space. It's just a new space and your body's reacting to that being a new space, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be there or shouldn't be doing this. Of course, there's a difference between like your own instincts of being like, I'm in danger. But I'm not saying, you know, it's different not being in danger, it's rather just being like, you know, it's nerve-wracking to take those first steps or acknowledging your limitations and or acknowledging your capacities. But listen to your body, which is something that one of our colleagues also says. Shout out to Shirley, who always says, you know, your body is also a way of communication, the way that you feel. No, so thank you for that. It's just a segue, which I don't know how to. It's a segue. You know, speaking of reflection and journaling, so I have a next question, which is simply, I guess, what are some of the ways you practice courage in your everyday life? So you said reflection and you know, perhaps that writing piece or, you know, that inner monologue, but anything else that you perhaps do? Yeah,
I mean, maybe like something about like the courage to rest, actually.
Yeah.
Because I think it can feel like a scary thing to actually stop whatever it is you're doing, whether it's like emails, TV, you know, like checking in if you're, you know, somebody who is a giver, like whatever it is. I think it can take a lot of courage to actually stop, to feel whatever it is like underneath that, you know, that activity. And I think that keep going and hustling and like grinding is like such a part of our culture that whenever you're doing the opposite, you're really building like new muscles and skills and like pathways. And as somebody once told me, you're also creating new legacies for the people coming behind you. So like, I think that deeply resonates for me when I think about it like that, when I think about, you know, what it means to kind of slow down, to stop, to say, again, back to I won't, or, you know, and to allow yourself, I think, pause and quiet. Just so that you can hear yourself. But I think hearing yourself is also a scary thing. Very scary. Because, you know, the voice might be saying, I'm conflicted about something. It may not actually be a clear answer. So I think that's the piece that sometimes when people say, listen to yourself, that, I don't know, I hear that and I get it. But at the same time, I think sometimes, you know, the voice that is emerging is not always like a clear voice. Sometimes it's a voice that's going to ask more questions or something, it's going to point out something that is unresolved. And then you just have to kind of sit with that. Being in your own head and being alone with your thoughts can be very scary. But one thing that I've learned, and I'm glad you brought up the whole pause piece, because one of the things that I've learned throughout my career, particularly when I'm doing interviews or speaking with clients or speaking with anybody, one of the greatest advice that I've ever gotten was to just stop. When someone asks you a question, I sometimes felt the urge to always keep talking. You know, like no dead air, no silence, just keep going until one individual that, you know, had interviewed me had said, you know, it's okay to just think, like just stop and think. And you know, yes, it's scary sometimes because, you know, sometimes when we think of interviews or we think of speaking with people, we think that silence means that you don't know. But I think silence is powerful. I think silence is a way of communication because that
you care. And it means that you're taking the time to think critically about your answers. And that's one strategy that I've taken. That has taken a lot of courage because I love to talk. So even when I'm talking right now, I'm thinking, let's wrap this up. Wrap up my own thoughts.
Yeah. And I think, like, appreciate that perspective. And I think as you were talking, one thing I was also like thinking about is like what courage looks like in the context of the pandemic. And like, I think that, I got used to being in my space in a certain kind of routine. So I think courage right now, in terms of an everyday act, a lot of it looks like trying new things, like doing something different, like, however small, however I define that, maybe reading a different genre. If I like, trying that out, wearing a pair of shoes that you wouldn't normally wear, brushing your teeth with your non-dominant hand. I don't know, but I just think that there's something to be said about allowing yourself to try. I think that takes a lot of courage, but it doesn't have to be. Sometimes it's portrayed as this huge moment, but I think it can be something a lot quieter than that.
Absolutely. Start small. And I think one of the things that I remember throughout the season, it was start small, and then, as you grow, you're moving towards, victories, right? Small victories, I think, lead to bigger victories. And I think taking that leap of faith, if not always or sometimes, will pay off. Yeah. So, I mean, those are all good strategies, and I hope, our listeners, take some of that, and because I those are super, super helpful. And thank you so much for sharing that last piece. And so, speaking of, our listeners and thinking about our next steps, and as we wrap up this season, where we really unpacked and deconstructed and reflected on fear, I ask you, any advice for those who are hesitant, to face their fears?
Yeah, I mean, I'll also say that I am hesitant to face my fear.
It's real.
I'm a real person too. And I think your question was around any advice in terms of facing fears.
I love how you're stopping to pause.
Yeah, like I literally am as I,
Courage,
as I think
folks.
about that. I mean, sometimes for me, it's the realization that I need to kind of get out of my own head a little bit. So that's kind of when I pick up the phone and I call someone. And even that is nerve-wracking because you're having to admit that there's something you can't quite figure out, or there's something you're grappling with. But I find that makes whatever I'm feeling afraid a lot smaller because it's shared. I think there's some like saying about like sharing the load or whatever. I can't remember what it is in this moment, but I think that's what it is, because it can feel like a weight. And I feel like in conversation with someone else, or just admitting that there is something that you're afraid of, there is something that feels like it's going to be a huge stretch for you. And I think just having another human being validate that, and offer comfort, because I think that's the other thing with fear is that, and as I say this, I admit that I have my own resistance to, I think, self-compassion, being able to say, it's okay that you're afraid. And I think we know how to say that as adults to children, but maybe not so much to ourselves or to other adults.
There you go.
Right? So I think that is something that I'm trying to practice saying to myself and to other adults.
Absolutely. I love the call a friend piece, because sometimes, we're in our own heads, right? And getting that feedback and getting that reflection, or even getting that affirmation that, like, yes, I hear that you're afraid, or I hear that, you're a little hesitant about this. But there are times where just hearing things like, it's going to be okay. Or, it's all gonna work out. Or, you know, you don't have anything to worry about because you got this. Little things like that have made such a huge difference in my life. And a lot of them have come from me just admitting to the people in my life that like, hey, I'm scared. I don't want to do this. I don't know how I'm going to do this. And as you said, like, it's a good piece about being adults. And when we're, you know, admitting your faults and your own limitation, lean on those people, right? Lean on your community, lean on your friends, lean on your family, and, you know, allow them to carry you through those moments, because that's what we're there for, right? Family and friends are there to support you. And, you know, once you find that safe space, I think you're able to grow, I think, even much faster, because then you have that community to lean on, and they can become your foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think validation is like sunlight.
Yes.
Right, and we all need it.
We all need it. Oh, folks, that's a bar. And I mean, and on that note, I think that's a beautiful way to end it off, because at the end of the day, I think we all experience this, but at the end of the day, I think we all need a good conversation about courage. And that's why I think I chose this topic, because courage is something that we all need and we all battle with, and fear is something that doesn't have any age, it doesn't, you know, have gender, it's all around us, you know, and we have every right to sometimes to have fears, but it's how we overcome them. I think that's what is important, right? So thank you so much for coming on and continuing this conversation with me. I'm so honored and I'm so blessed to have someone as intelligent and as someone as so brilliant as you, Candice. I really do appreciate it. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome.
Yes.
I love this conversation.
This was a great conversation. And to all my beautiful viewers and listeners, thank you so much for coming with me on this journey so I want you to let courage be your guide. And that's all from me. Take care and bye-bye.